A pleasant day to everyone. I am Christine and Miguel from Group 6. And our topic for today is all about the speech of Her Excellency Corazon C. Aquino, President of the Philippines, during the joint session of the United States Congress. Who is Corazon Aquino? Maria Corazon Cuanco Aquino, also known as Corazon C. Aquino, was born on January 25, 1933 at Tarlac Province and died on August 1, 2009 at Makati. She is a political leader who served as the first female president on the year 1986 to 1992 and restoring democratic rule in the country after the long dictatorship of the former President Ferdinand Marcos. She is the spouse of the late Benigno Simeon Aquino Jr., who was then a promising young politician. As we all know, Cory Aquino is the first female president in the country and the wife of Benigno Simeon Aquino and the mother of Ninoy Aquino. What did Corazon Aquino accomplish? Corazon Aquino appointed a new commission to write a new constitution that restored the bicameral Congress that had been abolished by Marcos. Siya ang nagsulat sa bag-o nga constitution nga gi-restore sa bicameral Congress. When we say bicameral Congress is naadara ang House of Representatives and the Senate. Aquino held elections for the new Congress and broke up the economic monopolies held by Marcos's allies. However, she failed to undertake fundamental economic or social reforms. Siya ang nag-held og elections para sa bag-o nga maglingkod sa Congress kay yang gipahawa ang katong gipahawa or giwash out niya ang katong mga allies ni Marcos.
Good morning, everyone. I am Hazel Ann Maluloy Mendez, and here is the Excellency speech of President Corazon Aquino. And this speech was delivered at Washington, D.C. on September 18, 1986. 3 years ago, I left America to bury my husband, Ninoy Aquino. I thought I had left it also to lay to rest his restless dream of Philippine freedom. Today, I have returned as the president of a free people.
In burying Ninoy, a whole nation honored him by that brave and selfless act of giving honor. A nation in shame recovered its own. A country that had lost faith in its future found it in a faithless and brazen act of murder. So in giving, we received. In losing, we find, and out of defeat, we snatched our victory. Katudong namatay si Ninoy is sa paglubong sa iyaha ang nagpaid og tribute ang nation para sa iyahang selfless act nga gibuhat in order for us nga ma-claim or maato ang democracy.
For the nation, Ninoy became the pleasing sacrifice that answered their prayers for freedom for myself and our children. Ninoy was a loving husband and father. His loss 3 times in our lives was always a deep and painful one. So for our country, Ninoy is one of our prayers for our country to be free against oppressive foreigners. Ninoy was one of the presidents who sacrificed for peace and safety in our country. Ninoy is a very kind and loving husband and father to his children. But his loss is a very deep and painful to our countrymen because we know that Ninoy did something good for our country and to give freedom and goodness to our country.
14 years ago, this month was the first time we lost him. A president turned dictator and traitor to his oath. Suspended the constitutions and shut down the Congress. That was much like this one before which I am honored to speak. He detained my husband along with thousands of others, senators, publishers, and anyone who had spoken up for the democracy as its end drew near. But for Ninoy, a long and cruel ordeal was reserved. The dictator already knew that Ninoy was not a body merely to be imprisoned, but a spirit he must break. For even as the dictatorship demolished one by one the institutions of democracy, the press, the Congress, the independence of judiciary, the protection of the Bill of Rights, Ninoy kept their spirits alive in himself.
The government sought to break him by indignities and terror. They locked him up in a tiny, nearly airless cell in a military camp in the north. They stripped him naked and held the threat of sudden midnight execution over his head. Ninoy held up manfully all of it. I barely did as well for 43 days. The authorities would not tell me what had happened to him. It was the first time my children and I felt we had lost him. So the government saw out Ninoy to discredit and subdue him. They locked him up with almost no air entering military camp in the north. In this event, sudden execution of midnight on his head, and for 43 days the authorities will not say what happened to him. Ninoy challenged its authority and proceeded quickly. If he survived this, he felt that God has destined him for another destiny. He only stopped when he imagined that the government would keep his body alive after the swift had destroyed his brain.
When that didn't work, they put him on a trial for subversion, murder, and a host of other crimes before a military commission. Ninoy challenged its authority and went on a fast. If he survived it, then he felt God intended him for another fate. We had lost him again. For nothing would hold him back from his determination to see his fast through to the end. He stopped only when it dawned on him that the government would keep his body alive after the fast had destroyed his brain. And so, with barely any life in his body, he called off the fast on the 14th day. God meant for other things, he felt. He did not know that an early death would still be his fate, that only the timing was wrong.
At any time during his long ordeal, Ninoy could have made a separate peace with the dictatorship, as so many of his countrymen had done, but the spirit of democracy that inheres in our race and animates this chamber could not be allowed to die. He held out in the loneliness of his cell and the frustration of exile, the democratic alternative to the insatiable greed and mindless cruelty of the right and the purging holocaust of the left.
And then we lost him, irrevocably and more painfully than in the past. The news came to us in Boston. It had to be after the 3 happiest years of our lives together. But his death was my country's resurrection in the courage and faith by which alone they could be free again. The dictator had called him a nobody. 2 million people threw aside their passivity and escorted him to his grave. And so began the revolution that has brought me to democracy most famous home, the Congress of the United States. So, according to the speech of President Corazon Aquino during the joint session of the U.S. Congress on September 18, 1986. During the death of Ninoy Aquino, many people were saddened, but his death was the resurrection of my nation to courage and faith where only they could be free again. 2 million people threw away their passivity and included him in his grave, and so began a revolution that brought him the most famous of democracy, the United States Congress.
The task had fallen on my shoulders to continue offering the democratic alternative to our people. Archibald MacLeish had said that democracy must be defended by arms when it is attacked by arms and by truth when it is attacked by lies. He failed to say how it shall be won.
I held fast to Ninoy's conviction that it must be by the ways of democracy. I held out the participation in the 1984 election the dictatorship called, even if I knew it would be rigged. I was warned by the lawyers of the opposition that I ran the grave risk of legitimizing the foregone results of the elections that were clearly going to be fraudulent. But I was not fighting for the lawyers, but for the people in whose intelligence I had implicit faith. By the exercise of democracy, even in a dictatorship, they would be prepared for democracy when it came, and then also it was the only way I knew by which we could measure our power even if the terms dictated by the dictatorship. Naglang siya sa view ni Ninoy that need gyud matamasa ang kalayaan. She insisted nga magdagan sa 1984 election bisan kabalo siya nga makorrupt or mamanipulate ang mga results. The attorneys nga naa sa opposition kay gi-warned siya nga delikado ang iyang situation kung situation nga naa siya. Pero wala siya'y labot or pake sa mga attorneys kay ang iyang priority is ang mga tao nga naay salig sa iyahang pagdagan. So that if moabot ang panahon nga maabot or maatuan na ang demokrasya is ma-prepared na ang mga katawhan.
The people vindicated me in an election shamefully marked by government thuggery and fraud. The opposition swept the elections, garnering a clear majority of the votes, even if they ended up, thanks to a corrupt commission on elections, with people proof of Corazon Aquino in an election that was embarrassingly marked by government thuggery and fraud. The opposition swept the elections, getting a clear majority of the votes, even though they ended, thanks to a corrupt election commission with nearly one-third of the seats in a representative form of government. And now they know what their power is.
Last year, in an excess of arrogance, the dictatorship called for its doom in a snapped election. The people obliged. With over 1 million signatures, they drafted me to challenge the dictatorship, and I obliged them. The rest is the history that dramatically unfolded on your television screen and across the front page of your newspapers. You saw a nation armed with courage and integrity stand fast by democracy against threats and corruption. You saw a woman poll watchers break out in tears as armed goons crushed the polling places to steal the ballots. But just the same, they tied themselves to the ballot boxes. You saw a people so committed to the ways of democracy that they were prepared to give their lives for its pale imitation. At the end of the day, before another wave of fraud could distort the results, I announced the people's victory. The distinguished co-chairman of the United States Observer Team in his report to your president described that victory. I was witness to an extraordinary manifestation of democracy on the part of the Filipino people. The ultimate result was the election of Mrs. Corazon C. Aquino as President and Mr. Salvador Laurel as Vice President of the Philippines. Many of you here today played a part in changing the policy of your country towards us. We Filipinos thank each of you for what you did, for balancing America's strategic interest against human concerns, illuminates the American vision of the world. When a subservient parliament announced my opponent's victory, the people turned out in the streets and proclaimed me president. And true to their word, when a handful of military leaders declared themselves against the dictatorship, the people relayed to their protection. Surely the people take, take care of their own. It is on that faith and the obligation it entails that I assumed the presidency. As I came to power peacefully, so shall I keep it. That is my contract with my people and my commitment to God. He held willed that the blood drawn with the lash shall not, in my country, be paid by blood drawn by the sword, but by the tearful joy of reconciliation. We have swept away absolute power by a limited revolution that respected the life and freedom of every Filipino. Now, we are restoring full constitutional government. Again, as we restore democracy by the ways of democracy, so are we completing the constitutional structures of our new democracy under a constitution that already gives full respect to the Bill of Rights. A jealousy independent constitutional commission is completing draft which will be submitted later this year to a popular referendum. referendum. When it is approved, there will be congressional elections. So within about a year from a peaceful but national upheaval that overturned a dictatorship, we shall have returned to full constitutional government. Given the polarization and breakdown we inherited, this is no small achievement. My predecessor set aside democracy to save it from a communist insurgency that numbered less than 500. Unhampered by respect for human rights, he went at it hammer and tongs. By the time he fled, that insurgency had grown to more than 16,000. I think there is a lesson here to be learned about trying to stifle a thing with the means by which it grows. I don't think anybody, in or outside our country, concerned for a democratic and open Philippines, doubts what must be done. Through political initiatives and local reintegration programs, we must seek to bring the insurgency down from the hills and by economic progress and justice, show them that for which the best intentioned among them fight. As president, I will not betray the cause of peace by which I came to power. Yet, equally, and again no friend of Filipino democracy will challenge this. I will not stand by and allow an insurgent leadership to spurn our offer of peace and kill our young soldiers and threaten our new freedom. Yet I must explore the path of peace to the utmost, utmost, for at its end, whatever disappointment I meet there, is the moral basis for laying down the olive branch of peace and taking up the sword of war. Still, should it come to that, I will not waver from the course laid down by your great liberator. with malice towards none, with charity for all, with firmness in the rights as God gives us to see the rights. Let us finish the work we are in, to bind up the nation's wound, to care for him who shall have borne the battle, and for his widow, and for his orphans, to do all which may achieve and cherish a just and lasting peace among ourselves and with all nations. Like Lincoln, I understand that force may be necessary before mercy. Like Lincoln, I don't relish it. Yet, I will do whatever it takes to defend the integrity and freedom of my country. Finally, may I turn to the other slavery, our our $26 billion foreign debt. I have said that we shall honor it, yet must the means by which. That would be all. Thank you.